Today we have here with us Carter Hoppy from our Toronto office. Carter is one of the most experienced, brightest Canadian immigration lawyers who's been practicing for over 25 years. I'm happy to have him among my partners and friends. Carter, international students, there was some changes. Now they can apply after their studies, when they complete their studies in Canada.
The problem was that under the former Conservative government, all of the international students in Canada had to compete with the entire rest of the world in the global expression of interest program called Express Entry. So it could be possible for a student to spend $100,000 on tuition, graduate from a Canadian institution, work successfully for a Canadian company for 2 or 3 years, and then not be selected under Express Entry. This has been perceived by the Liberal government, Minister McCallum, as ridiculous, really, because you're wasting all that talent. When an international student successfully graduates from a Canadian program and is able to convince an employer to hire that person on a for a high skill position, why would we send them home? So there are things that can be done and will be done to increase the points that those international students will get under the new system. It's also possible to encourage provinces to select the graduates from, for example, if someone graduates from the University of Toronto, they could give more spaces to the Ontario government under its PNP, Provincial Nominee Program. Or if someone graduated from the University of Winnipeg, Manitoba could get more slots, and thereby make it so that very few, if any, successful graduates of Canadian programs have to go home.
But I don't really agree with this program we have, because I think the international students must have their own category of their own, rather than to be mixed with the Express Entry class, which is basically for professionals which are educated abroad, that they have years of experience. So the job market in Canada would look at them differently. Do you think in the future we might come back to a few years ago when foreign students studying in Canada at the graduation could stay and apply for the permanent residency?
Yes, you know that old saying, nothing's permanent except change, right? So the former Minister of Immigration, Jason Kenney, when the Canadian Experience class was first introduced, which allows international students to graduate and work and then have a definite pathway to permanent residence, I think it was only about in 2011 or 2012 that Minister Kenney said he hoped that in the future everyone would come to Canada through the Canadian Experience class. And then a couple of years later, the same government came up with this new Express Entry system which pooled everyone together. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Express Entry gets broken up again and put back into 3 separate economic streams.
By the way, contrary to the federal guys and other provinces, us in Quebec, we've been fairly consistent, because if you graduated from a Quebec university 6 months before your graduation, you can still apply for a CSQ. So talking about consistency and a distinct society, I think Quebec has constantly been able to show itself different and more progressive, at least when it comes to its immigration programs.
There's no doubt about it. If the federal government followed the Quebec government in all those areas, we'd be far ahead. There's no doubt about that.
Of course. That's why in Quebec we still have our investor program, and the federal, they just simply canceled very quickly and very swiftly the entire business application portfolio of applications they had. I think nearly over 660,000 applications.
Yes, and I think it was the federal government, the old federal government, threw away, by canceling the investor program and all of those thousands and thousands of applicants, threw away, trashed billions of dollars of investment, which apparently Canada didn't need. So I think under the new Liberal government, we're going to see, maybe not this year, but next year, a return to a sensible, reasonable investor program for those people that have a passive investment requirement, who are not interested. Many people who are wealthy are very successful in their home countries, and they don't want to go to Canada necessarily to start a new business, because they're already very successful where they are. Those people, they want to be passive investors. They want to write a check, and a country like Canada should be diversified enough to take both types of investors, the active ones and the passive ones.
A lot of people apply these days for Antigua Economic Citizenship Program because that citizenship allow visa-free access to Canada. In my opinion, that citizenship allowing free access or easy access to Canada could help someone get into the PNP, for example, Ontario.
Yes, no doubt about it.
It really allows them to enter Ontario several times, maybe purchase a business. Do you think buying a business and then applying for a PNP will facilitate one's permanent residency to Canada and establishment in Ontario?
Well, you've got to be careful about an unconditional purchase without having something to show at the end that's going to be guaranteed. So what you want to do in the case of Ontario, for example, is you want to have a business plan which shows the Ontario government that if you are approved for the work permit, that then you will purchase this business. And it is possible to sign a conditional purchase agreement with a Canadian vendor where the vendor says, all right, I will wait until you get the Ontario approval before this deal closes. Because you don't want to chop off yourself at the knees. What if you buy the business and for some reason Ontario doesn't accept you, right?
Yeah. What's interesting also with us is the fact that you're always in Toronto. So you spend a fair amount of time in Ontario.
Yes.
But you can help many of our clients establishing themselves in Ontario under the PNP program.
Yes, and that's a new opportunity. For several years, we have had, in effect, no program in Ontario. Now we do. And so at the moment, since there's no investor program, the only program in Ontario happens to be the Ontario Entrepreneur Program. So we're definitely in a good position to take advantage of that fact.
But of course, especially about the fact that people applying to this program could immediately apply for work permits so they can move in, actually, them and their families to Ontario.
And that's where the Antigua connection comes in, because if they come from a country which normally, like say India, for example, which normally requires a visitor visa to enter Canada, that could hamper or slow down the work permit issuance process. But if the person happens to also be an Antiguan citizen, then they have no visitor visa requirement to visit Canada, which will speed up the the work permit program. It's a good idea.
Especially if someone needs a visa, if they do mention that they have an interest to migrate, the visa officers might not really be inclined to issue them a multiple entry visa as a tourist.
Yeah, there's a risk. Whenever you apply for a visitor visa to any country, there's a risk that some visa officer doesn't like whatever you've put down on your application and you get refused.
And of course, especially if you mention that I want to go there to buy a business prospection, because that's one of the reasons they could say that you have an interest not to go back.
Yeah, supposedly dual intent is permitted under the Immigration Act. So it's supposedly, in theory, all right to say, look, on this particular visit, I'm only going to be there a short period of time temporarily, but I do have a long-range permanent intention. Although that's permissible under the law, in the back of a visa officer's mind, if he hears, any suggestion that the person might stay permanently, automatically the visa officer could get suspicious. What if they don't qualify? Will they make a phony refugee claim? Yeah, that's always a problem. So it's good to have a passport like Antigua, which is visitor visa exempt.
Plus, don't forget, by the time you enter Canada, till the time you qualify and obtain your citizenship, we're talking 5, 6, 7 years.
Sure.
So that means during this time you could have a citizenship and a passport that allows you to travel the rest of the world.
Yes, oh yes, you're not going to get your Canadian passport anytime soon.
No.
That's right. The new Citizenship Law, by the way, which again, the Liberal government has relaxed the policy of the previous government, now requires that you only live in Canada for 3 years in total of a 5-year period. So it's quite flexible.
Well, we've gone back to pre-Jason Kenney's ideas, and but still I think the notion of residence hasn't changed. It's still going to be where did you spend midnight?
Yes, that's true. However, 2 things. The former citizenship law gave people like international students part credit, half-time credit for the time they spent in Canada prior.
That's maximum 1 year. Up to maximum 1 year.
Maximum 1 year credit toward the 3 years necessary to qualify, and you had to qualify within a 4-year period. So the new government under McCallum, they're going to restore the ability to get partial credit for 1 year credit.
Legal residency in Canada.
For legal residency prior to
residence.
permanent residence, that's right. And they've also made it more flexible at the back end. They've increased the total qualifying period to 3 years in a 5-year period. So people can come and go and still build up enough credits, 1,095 days in a 5-year period to qualify for citizenship. So the new government seems to be hitting on all cylinders.
Well, they seem to be playing game. But us, when a client comes to us, it's important to mention that we don't just advise on Canada. We try to cover the world. Some people want the economic citizenship program as the answer to their requirements. Some is the citizenship by investment, some is residency by investment, some is simply obtaining a passport as a travel document. Panama is the only program. And of course, migration is the classical routes that our ancestries or my parents, your ancestries used to come to Canada and which shall continue.
Well, a lot of people say that if you're not a Aboriginal Canadian, that we're all immigrants. Quite frankly, I think even the Aboriginal Canadians were immigrants themselves 10,000 years ago. So the whole world,
Detroit, yes.
the whole world's been moving around for thousands of years. We started out as humans, as nomads, and then we started settling in cities and so forth. And now we have these countries with these big walls, these borders, and our team of the, BLS services can break through those borders for people.
Well, actually, we've gone a little past that too, because recently I was speaking at a conference on changing company citizenship. So, we started by migration, then changing people's citizenship, either by investment, but residency by investment, or actually simply by migrating and then acquiring a new citizenship. And now the game is companies changing their citizenship and relocating, so redomiciliation of a company or changing a company's citizenship.